And here is your Marvel Snap news of the week, all thanks to the Marvel Snap Bugle Twitter account, which captures all of the dev responses on Discord, Twitter, etc. And we also have some popular decks of the week thanks to snap.fan. Let's get to it. So here we have a comment about the latest patch. We just had a patch drop and it nerfed Red Skull again, but they kind of talked about hitting Shuri at a later date. And this person is just kind of saying that that's just a bit of a bandage and maybe you should have just gutted Shuri in the interim instead of just, continuously attack Red Skull. And then Glenn goes ahead and says, it's been a priority of ours to not gut cards because it feels terrible and it sets a scary precedent for how we might react to balanced outliers. Maybe that's wrong, but it's a complex topic. I totally understand where he's coming from. You can look at past examples where they don't attack those cards too hard. They don't gut them. For example, right now, Shuri, right? And then it continues to be oppressive in the meta. But then you have cards like Leader that was oppressive, was the top card in the game for a small window of time, got absolutely gutted, and now it's probably the worst card in the game. So there is a difficult line of balance there. I mean, there's a lot of solutions and I'm sure they're going to get to the right one, but I think they just want to take their time, find the right approach, and then kind of execute week by week, it seems, with this new patch. So I think this is actually just good news. Here's a really quick one that I find pretty exciting. I always love the animations in the cards. I think it just really gets the emotional attachment going to your collection. And anyways, this user asked about a null animation because it's null. Like that's like almost a big bad. Didn't really make the cut of the big bad list, but it's pretty much there. And anyways, he's been out since December, and Nikki goes ahead and says, yes, our goal is to get VFX for all of our cards eventually. We prioritize cards that need FX to make their gameplay more understandable, and we hope to get back and catch up on others eventually. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, no, you see the number ticking up, so it's not like there needs to be an animation to let you know how he works. But by example, we had Kitty Pryde that came out, and I said with her, how she works, it's complicated. We weren't sure leading up until the release how she was actually going to function. And I said there needs to be an animation for this card to make it clear. And I think the animation that they had, I know she's disabled right now, rip, but the animation that is present on the card is a good indicator of when you can pull her back to receive the buff. So I think that's really healthy. I really look forward to seeing all the animations they come up with. How about this one? Okay, I thought this was pretty spicy, speaking of Leader. So this user says, will you ever revisit Leader? He definitely got gutted. I think it's actually in response to the previous thread that we were talking about. And Glenn goes ahead and says he is on the list. There's a list. But we kind of already knew that. There was the watch list that Ben Brode famously tweeted about when it was Galactus that was on that list. He got a 1-power nerf, which didn't even really end up being a nerf. But anyways, Glenn says the feedback here and metrics on Leader after his rework are related to how and why we've approached Shuri Taskmaster decks this way. So there you go, a little bit more of an answer to the Shuri situation, but also pretty interesting to note that Leader might get buffed. Actually, I think it's very, very likely to get a buff in the foreseeable future. I would say probably in the next month if they're doing these weekly balance changes. So look out for Leader. He might get an uptick in some value soon. Here's an interesting clarification on the upcoming card Snowguard. So it's a little bit confusing of how the changing of that effect occurs. So my buddy Loot Muncher here says, got time for a few questions on Snowguard. What about if you play Hawk into a lane and then it bounces back to your hand? Will it stay as a Hawk when it comes back? Does it change to a bear at the end of the turn? And then Glenn goes ahead and clarifies that it will return to your hand as a Hawk. So it doesn't change back to Snowguard or anything like that. If it's a Hawk when you played it, it's going to come back as a Hawk. But then it's going to change to a bear before begin playing cards for the next turn. This is an important bit of clarification here because basically it's going to continue to swap once it's back in your hand, but also that it occurs, I would say, basically at the end of the play phase when the cards are all revealed and then the turn is about to start. So it's almost like the start of the turn, but it's at the end of the very last turn, and that's when that bear is going to switch. And the only reason I think that is important is because if a location, let's say you Scarlet Witch a location, it switches and it's like, I don't know, one of the locations that plays cards there and it pulls the card from your hand and it's still the Hawk. It hasn't switched over to the bear after you clicked end turn. Okay, so there's that little like fine line when the card changes. A little bit of clarification there. Dude, I thought this was so sick. What a great suggestion here by this user. But they talk about, would you ever consider making a mode where every location is one location? And they use this example as ruins, because wouldn't it be interesting if the locations didn't impact the game? Then it's just about your cards versus my cards, and let's see what can happen. Wouldn't that be fun? I think that'd be sick. I don't know why this person got downvoted so hard. I think it's a great idea. But then Glenn goes to expand on that even further and says, we might one day temporarily offer a game mode that does something like this, but I wouldn't expect it to be a frequent offer, nor a PvP mode. Locations are important for games remaining engaging, long-term fun. 100% agree. Definitely do not do that in any ranked mode whatsoever. But if you ever played a game where there's a brawl mode, like if you look at Tavern Brawl in Hearthstone, where it's just a fun, free to play experience, maybe it rotates once a week, you could definitely do that in Snap. Oh my gosh, I think it should be there, where it's just like, okay, it's just one location, all three of them, and it rotates every week, and it's just for fun. Maybe there's a small reward that you can get if you just, complete or win one game in that mode every week. I don't know. I think that could be a very fun experience, a little refreshing, and essentially an unranked mode, right? All we have is a ranked mode. It'd be nice to have something else. If you ever wondered why you didn't get Kang the Conqueror from the hub, it's because he is actually the only card you cannot receive. I did not know this. So this user asks about cards that pop out of the hub, and Glenn goes ahead and clarifies that all cards are fair game, with the exception of Kang. If the hub could generate Kang, it would risk looping the game. That makes a lot of sense. We don't want that. I mean, when Kang first came out, everyone figured out about like if you Cosmo, Kang, and then Arnim Zola, some kind of crazy combo, and it would create an endless loop. Everybody was worried about it, but then they realized how difficult it is to pull off and how many times you have to lose before you actually, pull that combo off, and it wasn't worth it at all. So now nobody really remembers that, and now this is actually a possibility if he was to spawn from the hub. So clearly the team knew that endless time loops with Kang were possible. They weren't worried about that crazy combo that players could pull off, but they were worried about locations affecting it, and they got it covered, so that's pretty neat. Going back to locations as well, Tarlord here says, with the pool of locations ever expanding, the RNG variance also increases. Will the game ever reach a point where locations need to be limited to a smaller pool? I've actually been very vocal about this. I think that a location rotation would be really healthy, where it's like a season has X amount of locations and then it rotates to the next season. I think that'd be really fun. And maybe that's a separate mode, right? You have two ladders. There could be the location rotation and then just like everything. It's almost like a wild and standard format or something along those lines. Glenn actually goes ahead and says, I hope so. He doesn't always give all that many details or that much direction into what he wants. So I thought it was interesting to see that. He says, potentially devising play modes using location mixes to build unique metagames was one of the things that most attracted me to working on Snap. So there you go. Glenn hasn't been on the team very long. I think it was like maybe 4 months ago at this point in time. So it's interesting to see his direction and what he wants to do with the game. If you ever thought that the Aero nerf was a bit too much, a little bit too strong, well, Glenn is going to go ahead and tell you otherwise. So this player says, I'm curious if the team is happy with Aero in her current form, if there are any plans to slightly walk back the change to her from the last balance patch. Even if she were kept strictly as a tech option, pulling the last card instead of the first card played in a turn has some frustrating implications where she isn't an effective answer to the things she's supposed to answer, which I think they're just hinting at the Shuri Red Skull issue or something along those lines. Like you could still play basically because Taskmaster and Red Skull are 5-cost cards, the Red Skull Shuri player can just play that first and then play their 0 or their Sunspot or whatever that 1-cost thing is in their hand to avoid the Aero play. Anyhow, Glenn goes ahead and says she's still a winning card, one of the 10 most played Series 3 cards. That's interesting to me. And one of the 20 most played cards overall. I would love to know what's number 1. They just nerfed Sunspot for a similar reason, so I'm sure he was up there, but yeah, that's pretty neat. The nerf hit her almost as perfectly for our goals. So there you go. They hit their goal. I think it was actually a really good change. I think she's still viable. I wouldn't want to see her changed anymore. I like her the way she is. Okay, here's a Leech comment, and I might be doing a video about Leech just because there's so much talk about this card. So this user says, we've seen the devs use the term polarizing for cards like Galactus. Have you ever considered Leech to be in the same category? Also, have you ever thought of updating Leech to get the Nakia treatment where he only removes the abilities of X amount of cards instead of your whole hand? I've seen this suggested a bunch of times, and it seems pretty logical. I think everybody would be pretty happy with it. There's a set amount of RNG if that were the change. But Glenn goes ahead and says, yes, Leech is a polarizing card in many ways, more than one. When I use the term as a designer, I usually mean that a card or strategy tends to be either very weak or very strong in practice, much more often than it's middling, right? So on that spectrum of being very strong, very weak, falls in the middle there. It's also accurate to say that there's a sharp emotional divide around both Galactus and Leech. However, we did consider that adjustment, but that Leech wouldn't serve a role. For us. It would just stop getting played, which we do understand as an outcome maybe many players would be fine with. And I think many players would be fine with that. I did a quick little fun Twitter thing where I was like, buff a card, nerf a card, and delete a card. And the amount of delete Leech that was there was a lot. I think it's like the go-to card to get deleted, which is maybe an upcoming video topic. Stay tuned. Here's a really interesting one, something I was very vocal about early on in beta when I first started playing the game. It's about universal boosters. Sometimes it feels a little bit bad. You're trying to get boosters on one card. You play like 20 games and you still cannot get those boosters on that card. Imagine if there was a resource that was just universal so I could use it towards them. And it doesn't have to be the most abundant resource, just a little bit of extra to tip me over to get my card, to the next step that I want it to, unlock it to the next step. And then Steven, a long-term designer for the game, goes ahead and says, we have discussed universal boosters a ton at Second Dinner. The main thing holding us back from adding them as a new additional item is UI UX complexity. Tracking them, displaying them, and determining which is spent alongside all of the character boosters is a tough problem. I totally understand. You have like over 200 cards at this point in time, and they all have their own respective boosters. Then you have a universal one. I'm sure that's pretty difficult on the technical side. The double booster works that it prioritizes cards that need more boosters to be upgraded. Infinite cards are treated like ultras, 50 boosters, to be excluded from the doubling chance. So there is a bit of a chance, but if you have a card at ultra, it's not going to have that doubling chance. It's not going to have that increased chance of getting boosters, which I thought that was kind of neat. And I guess that goes for infinite cards as well. So those two don't really get the priority in the boosters that you would think. Instead, it's the earlier stuff like your rares or your frame breaks or whatever. And then he says, I'm confident we will add more improvements to the system over time, but no ETA right now. And then says right at the bottom there, we have no plans to replace character boosters with universal boosters. If we added it, it would be in addition, not instead of. That makes a lot of sense to me. You already have a pretty healthy system. I think at this point, nobody's really complaining about boosters. They're a bit underwhelming to get as a reward, but it's just that like low value currency that's just kind of in the game, a mobile game, right? They always have to have those. A universal one, it'd be nice. Here's another one about the card that's going to be coming out very soon. It's Jeff, the baby land shark. And this player it makes a very valid point. Is Professor X says lockdown. Nothing can happen. It is a rule. This is locked. But then Jeff breaks that rule. So how do they go about deciding who gets to break the rules and who doesn't? So generally, Glenn says, cards that break rules win versus things that set rules, which is kind of a funny analogy for life. Professor X prevents some game actions and events, and Jeff says nothing can do that to him, so he wins. Jeff always wins. Let's go. This is different from Vision, who just says that you can take the game action of moving him, but lacks anything else to stop X from locking him down or out. So Vision loses, Jeff wins. Here's a note about locations. It's a bit of a longer response, so I'll just rip through it right now. So this player is basically saying, why do you keep making these terrible locations that I don't like? Fair, okay? But Glenn goes ahead and says location variance is really important to Snap. It keeps games from being repetitive, adds depth, softens skill and matchup gaps, and can even turn the metagame sometimes. I completely agree with this. I have no problem when it's a feature location, 1 day, 24 hours, 50% increased show rate. I actually enjoy it. I think it's pretty fun, even if it's not very fun location. I don't mind it once a week, okay? That's my opinion. But anyways, says it is important that some manifestations of that variance be disruptive in the same way that Magic needs mana screw, chess needs time pressure, and poker needs bets with incomplete information, Snap needs locations, okay? I thought that was a pretty interesting response, a very well thought out response. We do like to experiment with different manifestations of that disruption. 100% agree here. We have gone to the deep end of that pool a couple more times than we likely needed to lately. Yeah, Krakoa and a few others, okay? And some coming up. So they're they don't plan these like every week. They're like, oh, let's put that one out. Like, this is planned well in advance. So they didn't understand the backlash of the community. They don't have the immediacy to respond to that feedback. So it's always going to be a staggered response. But I think, you know, what he's about to say here kind of responds to that. You can expect to see somewhat softer locations among the new ones later this year, but not exclusively, as we want to keep a certain frequency of disruption. So there you go. Locations are going to kind of get a little bit more, I don't know, flexible, I guess you could say, in terms of what you can and cannot play. But there's still going to be occasionally the Krakoa of the locations. And lastly here, I have one from Steven. I think this makes a lot of sense. This player is talking about selling unwanted variants for gold, or basically any resource in the game, right? Because you get so many and it gets clustered, especially the ones that you've split a bunch of times. Like, you're never going to use those old splits once you find like an Inkified version that you like, or gold split, or anything along those lines, right? So Steven goes ahead and says, our philosophy is we do not want players to destroy their collection. It's a very unique collection for each player, right? Everyone's going to have something different and they don't want to ruin that, but we do want to improve collection bloat at some point in the future though. I'm really glad that they understand that and they have plans of addressing that. I don't know what it looks like if you can't sell, destroy, or remove some of those variants, but for people who are at a very high collection level, it gets, you know, it's a little bit cumbersome trying to find that one variant that you really like, or that split that you really like. There's a few search engines that make it relatively easy, but I think it could be a lot more smooth, a lot more simple. Anyways, there you go. That is your Marvel Snap news of the week. Thank you so much for watching. Snap subscribe if you're not already subscribed. I'll keep you guys updated on everything Marvel Snap. Thank you, and I'll catch you guys next time.